Are you all ready to go then?
Yeah, do you want me to do a presentation like I would do it for the official, at the conference, or maybe we will just talk and discuss? So are you recording this or not? That's the question.
I am. Why don't you do why don't you walk through it and then we'll talk about it afterwards?
Okay.
I'll take notes and then...
Yeah, well, it's not that much, I can walk through it still, but, the point is that presentation space or maybe presentation time. So I will just kind of show this presentation to people whenever they want to.
Yeah.
Or maybe, I'll just sit with my laptop, suggest that we go through the presentation, and then I will show the simulation from the very same laptop.
Okay.
So that's
I think it's good to kind of walk through the slides and see if you have good information there, and if we're missing anything, or if there could be a way to integrate the demo. Because I've done this before where you have think of it as kind of like maybe a poster where you're showing I don't know what the demo, if there's a major thing to the demo, or if they come by and you say, would you like to see my slideshow and then a demo. So pretend I were a person at the conference and you were presenting it, everything, the talk and then the demo and everything.
Okay, yeah, I can do it this way, for instance.
Okay.
Yeah. It's just my first time going to a conference and presenting something. So
well, yeah, it is a little. If you've never done a poster or anything.
No, I've never done it.
Well, it's kind of daunting, but it's not so bad if you have it ready. If you have a good it's like a poster. If you have a well-designed poster, it's more compelling to people who actually ask you about it. I don't know, maybe you could even have a demo, or you could have the simulation running as people are walking by, so they could see it, and it draws their attention.
So that's what I've thought about. Totally understand. So that's what I've thought about. Maybe just showing the simulation and somehow maybe also divide the screen. I don't know, on one half you have the presentation, the second half you have the demo itself, where people can do stuff. Yeah, we'll have to think about it.
Okay.
Okay,
so pretend I'm coming up to you at the conference and I say, "Oh, what is this all about? How do you demo it?"
Yes, right. So I'll. Okay, good point. I guess I will still begin with the presentation, show some slides, explain the concept. So maybe, just draw people's attention with the simulation first, so that they kind of sit to me and we start talking, and then I'll explain the concept behind that. And then we can maybe go back to the simulation and, do some simulation run already with it, so that people know the background of it, what's it's all about in concrete terms. Yeah, that's probably what I would do.
Okay. So now that I've seen your simulation kind of open, then you would have these slides that you would show the person.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so I can then go through the slides and...
Okay, let's share a screen so I can see the slides.
Okay, sure. So here it is, my browser screen, and then...
All right.
Okay, I hope when I go to full screen mode, you can still see it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, that's good. So yeah, I'm ready to begin when you are.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, all right. Hello everyone, my name is Stefan Dvoretskii, and I'm presenting a Google Summer of Code 2019 project that we did together with my mentor, Dr. Bradley Alicia, under the orthogonal research lab in INCF, which is called Modeling Neural Development with BraGenBrain Vehicles. So first of all, this idea came to us during our talks about BraGenBrain vehicles, which is an old concept, like relatively old concept from 1970s, from a psychologist, Valentino BraGenBrain, which is all about embodied cognitive agents going through space and having a relatively simple body composition, which, however, can emerge some complex or complex behaviors. That's work of BraGenBrain vehicles has given a begin to many robotics papers, for instance, also including simulations just of, so to say, plain BraGenBrain vehicles. So some kind of very simple robot or a robot with very simple body moving through environmental space with its own objects, with its own attractors and some stimuli, giving signals to the vehicle, to this cognitive agent. As we all know, there's been, of course, also a very intensive development of neural networks since the time of 70s and since the time of the end of 20th century, which we know now takes rise in machine intelligence. However, there were never ever some cross behind these two concepts. So an effort to put a neural network as a functioning brain inside a embodied cognitive agent going through space or its own environment filled with objects and stimuli. And that's exactly what we pursue with our simulation suite with the project, to give the embodied BraGenBrain vehicle style agents a brain and then see which behaviors emerge. Right on the right, you see on the picture on the right, you see an example of a robot based on BraGenBrain vehicle concept. As we see, there are some sensors to it. There are also some motors which receive signals from sensors and move vehicle in this or that direction. And of course, sensors receive signals from world objects, which are depicted in circles here, which then kind of influence the vehicle behavior or where it will move. All right. So in our worlds, how is it right now? Vehicles do have a body and obstacles or world objects in 2D space. On the right, we see an example of four most basic behaviors that emerge in BraGenBrain vehicles. These have just two sensors and two motors with various polarities. So we say if a motor has a plus polarity, it will go in the direction of impulse received by the sensor. And if it has the opposite polarity, so minus polarity, it will go away from the stimuli that sensor receives. Right, so yeah, the body is comprised of sensors, as we said, and of motors that react to sensors and move the vehicle along the way that sensors kind of tell to. Entire concept is to build the brain, so the neural network between sensors and motors, and see what happens, and also play around with networks, with various weights, also various architectures of these networks, and see what happens, how the vehicles will behave based on their brain. Yes, just to say a technical detail, we also had an issue that our world still should be limited because of the computational capacities, and we decided to make vehicles portal through the sides of the world limits. So whenever the vehicle reaches a world limit, it will just go after it and kind of show from the other side. So if we say vehicles go above the screen, it would show from down the screen, for instance. All right, and now we come to the interesting part. How do we develop the vehicles? How do we try various possibilities out? Because of course, as we can imagine, it scales up high, even on the beginning. So based on even if we have a few nodes in our neural network in our brain of the vehicle, we have a lot of possibilities to build this brain for the actual architecture of this brain. And there we have decided to try out genetic algorithms to show the vehicle's evolution and to try various things out. So yeah, genetic algorithms that we employ is just the usual concept of it. It's an idea based on the biological development, biological evolution, that we have various individuals going through epochs that have offspring. They also mutate, and of course we then select them based on some fitness function, which will come later too. Now, just the technical detail how we do it. We represent our brains as adjacency matrices, and then we also convert these adjacency matrices to the binary representation, which is also its own thing that I can talk about later if you ask. And then we do our genetic algorithms on the binary representations, convert them back to adjacency matrices, and then we have a new brain that's either been mutated or crossover, so a new member of the population, new agent is being produced and tried. Then the second epoch comes, we also do the same, we mutate, we cross over, then we select the most fit individuals, and well, also some lucky ones to try some various optima and to run the problem that we have some local minima, and then we can't move further. And then we repeat it once again and again, going through several epochs and seeing what happens. Right, so the fitness function is also a hard decision. What do we employ as fitness function? Right now, how it is in our simulation, we decided to see how wide does the vehicle move. So how big is the area which vehicle covers with its movement now? And we say, well, if vehicle covers a big area, then we say that it's fit for the next population, and we leave its adjacency matrix to be the fit for the next epoch. It comes from the fact, so it's pretty primitive for now on. It's maybe one of the easiest things you can think about. With this, we try to run out the problem that vehicles just stay on their place and don't move nowhere, or move in several directions that are opposite to each other, and so we get no behavior that makes sense. So with this area, fitness function as area of movement, we run the most making no sense behaviors. Yeah, the also thing to mention is the problem that we have with genetic algorithm. The one thing that is there in BraGenBrain vehicles is that partial good solutions seem to not comprise the final one when we are talking about environmental simulation as we have it right now in brains of the vehicles. So we cannot develop several zones of brain separately and then kind of put them together to form a new brain. We rather have to develop the whole brain which of course adds to the scalability. So if we want to develop a brain with 700 nodes, we can't just pick like 30 nodes in each run and then make them comprise the whole brain. We have to run, each time we have to run a 700 to 700 adjacency matrix and evolve this brain as a whole, which of course adds to the computational complexity, but still it's a matter of fact now, so we can run away from that. Right. And the question is, of course, what we want to achieve with this is to see whether we can develop or find out some conserved functional brain motifs that also maybe have some biological function or resemble some natural brain motifs that we see also in some natural animals. That's right. So for that, we simulate biological development of brain as neural networks, and then the development. The vehicle runs through developments through various epochs. Well, we also have a population of multiple agents. We pick the best ones, the ones that have behavior that makes most sense. And of course, it also depends on how we build our environment. So where the objects, what objects are, which goals maybe the agent has, which will come later in use cases, how the world is built, saying generally. Yeah, there is some idea that we also have to select from our result or from running various epochs. We would maybe look at natural occurring connectome patterns in various animals. Well, we have this graphs, which an example you can see on the right. It's an area, separate area of rhesus-ape brain from the natural scientific data, and we would then compare some animals' brains with the brains that we've developed with our simulation in our BraGenBrain vehicles with neural networks. Yeah, then as I've told before, we of course want to run some experiments to kind of define what we are looking for, what's really of interest, and what we want to see maybe in the first. And best is to use our simulation suite to build some experiments upon it. We have some predefined things like embodied conscious agents that also have brain represented as a network, that we run evolutionary algorithms, and then we can build upon it and add some terms to it and some environmental definitions, so that we have a defined experiment and then run it. Yes, of course, when we define the experiment somewhat deeper, we also have some more definite metrics and definite goals, what we want to look, what we want to achieve. The example of it would be a salesman problem. So right, on the right you see an example of a salesman problem. It should be pretty known to everybody, but still I just going to repeat the most basic terms of it. So we have some cities or some points on the map in our simulation, which we want to visit, and visit one time only. And we look for the for the way that has the least distance overall for visiting all of the cities and come to the city where we departed from. So right, in our world we would do pretty much the same, just without the Europe map. Our vehicle would start somewhere and we would have some dots on the map that it should go through, and then we will evaluate its fitness based on how good does if it has visited all the dots once, and how big was its overall path? How long was it? And of course, if looking at it, some use case comes to your mind, you're also very much welcome to tell us about it. What would maybe be of interest for you, for your colleagues, and what would be sensible to build as an experiment in our simulations here. So yeah, right now we can switch to the simulation, to the actual simulation, and look at what's happening there. Okay, so I guess this part I would kind of talk with people.
Yeah, I mean, you probably want to show your simulation running. I don't know. Okay. Yeah, because, I mean, I guess, okay, so actually, why don't you pull the slides back up again before we do that? I had a couple of comments.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, there are a couple of typos and things. So the first slide, like the first, number 2.
Number 2.
Yeah. Parallelly, when you say parallelly, a neural networks area developed, say, in parallel.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then no efficient way to cross the two. Yeah. So you're in cross the two means neural networks and.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I'm just trying to think of how to present this, because this is a nice presentation, but on the other hand, in like a demo to a group of people, you might not want to like do this like in, slide by slide. I think it might be good if you just wanted to like, and sometimes you might not want to give the entire presentation. You might just want to focus on one slide for someone. So if they come up to you and ask you a question, you can say, well, here's a slide I have for it. It has the details. I would say, it might also work well to have like a more visual presentation, but I think that it's important also to have a lot of the background in this, because it's kind of a lot of subtle concepts here. So you're going to have to introduce people. Okay, so that's good on slide 1, or number 2. Now go to number 3.
Mm-hmm.
And number 3 is where you have the overview of BraGenBrain vehicles. You say the brain is in between, and you can just after that put like sensors and motors, just so that it reads better.
Between sensors
and motors,
yeah, probably that's more.
And then adjacency matrix. So wait a minute. What else did I have here? Portals through walls. Okay, good. That one's good. And again, you have a nice picture here of how typically how the vehicles would be, produce behaviors. So people who aren't familiar with it can get a sense of what it's like. That's good.
I also thought about maybe exchanging pictures between slide 2 and slide 3, because I'm kind of telling here about BraGenBrain vehicles that we built on this concept. So maybe I would also want to explain what this concept is based on this picture in the second slide, and then in the third slide I would show just a robot.
Yeah, actually, there are I don't know if you've seen in the book. They do have like pictures of the vehicle with like neurons with inside the body. So like they do show. I think they show like pictures of how the neurons wire up, or how the connections between the sensors and effectors are. I remember. Do you have the book? I thought I had sent it to you a long time ago.
You mean the actual vehicles book?
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, I surely do have it.
Okay, I think they're in that book. There's some figures, and I think you can just look in the table of contents. It's just like a picture of one of the vehicles, and you have connections between sensors and effectors. They're just lines drawn. A picture of that would say, well, this is how people have approached the inside of the vehicle, the brain, and just pictures. I think in that case, and just show them like how people thought of like that nervous system. So what you're doing is quite a bit different than that. You're producing like a bunch of complexity inside of that. So, I mean, that's something that might be of interest to people. They ask, well, how does your thing differ from what BraGenBrain did? Someone might ask that question.
If we show the neural networks, of course.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see, number 4. Okay, so this one, this is where you talk about genetic algorithms, which is always like, if you don't know genetic algorithms, it might be a bit tricky. Most people there might know a little bit about them, so it's probably okay.
Yeah, exactly. So the case, I remember I've told you that I've presented it in some lab where we're applying for work in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a computational biology lab. And still, when I've asked whether everybody knows what a genetic algorithm is, just one person said that he knew it.
Oh.
All of the other ones, they didn't really know what it is. So I think that still makes sense to explain what we're doing there.
I hope, your number is higher. But I think the search spaces, everyone there will probably know what search spaces are. So having that, I mean, people will know intuitively what's going on. So in this one we have, okay. What was interesting? You mentioned that, remember we had that conversation about modularity a long time ago?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's interesting that you're finding that that's not a thing here. That it's not possible to have a modular nervous system when you're, so you can't partition the solution into subsets and then build on them. You have to basically involve the entire brain and then.
Yeah, maybe I've said it a little bit rough this time. So basically, that comes from my conversation with Jeff Yoshimi.
Okay.
That he's kind of he was not really persuaded that it's possible from his work.
Yeah.
I mean, we try to put like seem to not. Where's the final one here? Yeah. So maybe I just have to say it somewhat easier. Or maybe I can also leave it out, of course.
Well, no, actually leave it in, because that's an interesting observation. But what I'm saying is people will ask you about this, undoubtedly.
Okay, should I refer to Jeff Yoshimi then?
You can, if you want to say that when they ask you, you can. I don't know. Like, I mean, it's not something that we really know the answer to, because we've not run a lot of experiments. So it's maybe you could say prediction, partial solutions may not comprise the final one. Something like that.
So should I change seem to may here?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then at the beginning, say prediction.
Like here.
Yeah, right there.
Mm-hmm.
And then colon, and then partial solutions. So I mean, because people ask like, oh, this should be modular in some way, isn't it? And you're like, well, and then you can talk about like, you've had conversations with people, and based on the kind of going through the design, it may not do that. I mean, I don't really know. I would, there is this thing in genetic algorithms called building blocks, but the problem is that, that's sort of a where, kind of where what answer you want. And then you get, so this is more, I think this is more open-ended in the sense that you're interacting with the world, and it's like, well, what happens when you interact with the world? Well, we don't really know, what parts of the nervous system are going to be like important, or in this case, it's just a network that's forming. So we don't really know what's important and what's not. So, it's just be aware that people are very likely to ask you about that. And then maybe just in this slide in general, they might ask you some questions about, what your predictions are for, when you start using the platform, what do you think will happen? And you don't have to have, you have to have a somewhat good answer. You can just talk about like, well, I'm really not sure, but, and then maybe in this case, if they ask you about that, refer to your use cases slide right away, and say, oh yes, well, we're talking about coming up with these use cases. And so that kind of grounds it in something concrete, and then you might have a discussion about that as well. But we'll see how that goes. It'll be interesting.
Yeah, that's basically what we want, didn't we? A discussion definitely about use cases. That's what we're going for.
Yeah, and then,
that's a good idea, I think.
And you might even elicit that conversation on that slide, like if they look interested. You're going to talk about it in 2 more slides, but so let's go to slide number 5.
All right.
Okay, so this one is nice. It's Reese's monkey brain, actually. It's not an ape.
Okay. What's the difference between them?
Oh, it's just taxonomic, but there are going to be people there who know the difference. So again, they're going to like.
No, it's also interesting for me, basically.
Yeah.
What's the...
Yeah, apes are like gorillas, humans, chimps, and orangutans, and then everyone else is a monkey, pretty much. In primates,
Okay.
Yeah. So this is a nice slide, and you have an example here. I don't know if you can make it bigger or like stretch it out a little bit. It's kind of
I can try to kind of cut it, but well, let's try.
Well, it's got like that white space in the image. Well, I guess you could probably just do it that way.
Yeah. So I will remove the big white space and put like this.
Yeah.
It's pretty high. That's the problem.
Yeah.
So I can, of course, do it like this.
Yeah, that looks
if you
better.
think
A little bit better. Yeah, just like to show the, the
structure.
nodes a little bit. Yeah, the structure. And then people, will get a sense of what you're going for in terms of the connectome. It's always good to show images of the connectome. Sometimes you'll get people who are very new to the field and they don't know anything about what a connectome looks like. So yeah, and then the points are very interesting. So you're actually now telling them that you're developing this brain, and it's different from what Breitenberg did, which he wasn't interested in so much in connectomics, or at least he didn't know about it at the time. It wasn't a field back then. And then development happens and depends on environment and lifestyle. So you're stressing that in this case you're developing them, that's important. The environment's important, and then the select natural occurring connectome patterns, which is interesting because then that goes back to your slide number 4 with genetic algorithms, where you're actually having, you're talking about the selection criterion. So when people talk about, when you talk about that, you might refer back to your previous slide or just tell people this is, why we use genetic algorithms, because we can select these patterns in a way that's, like what happens in a brain.
I will put a reminder about it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and then you could do a subgraph search to compare it with animal databases, and so that's good. Um, and so people will get excited about that because they'll have all sorts of suggestions perhaps on that. But anything computational, then if you give them some keywords, maybe they'll have some good ideas, or it'll stimulate some conversation. So if you go to number 6,
Okay.
and that's these cases. So that's good. And we have a very good concrete example here of a salesman or a traveling salesman map where you're trying to optimize a path between those points. And then we can use those points as cues to perhaps facilitate that process. So people have done TSP with a bunch of different types of algorithms like swarm intelligence or like some sort of heuristic algorithm where they're people it's been an outstanding problem for many years, and in this case what we're saying is that you can develop a brain that might do this problem using spatial cues and being able to integrate that in some way. And then people say that's interesting. They might have some suggestions about how to facilitate that. They might also have other use cases that they want. And, I think here it's like they have a concrete example, but maybe they'll have some other types of things we've never thought of before. I talked to Z about maybe some of his work. We should have like a use case conversation at some point where we just kind of really drill down into what kinds of things are possible. But I like this example because it's something that people can relate to, but also it's it's a pretty good problem. I mean, if you can do that, you get some publicity out of the
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going for with presenting this example.
Yeah. So let's see, and then you deleted slide 7, which is like a
kind of. It's a reference slide. I don't show it in the presentation, but if somebody asks which work we are basing on, then I will also show that.
Yeah. Okay, that looks good. And then hopefully, I would like mix it up where if someone wants to go through the entire presentation, you can. But I would really just kind of maybe use these as conversation points more often than not.
Yeah, exactly. So that was saying I would just show it on demand, so to say. So I'll talk to people, maybe ask them what they really want to see, whether they want to see the whole background, or we can just go into the simulation, and if something is not clear, they will ask me, and I'll point to the slide and say, okay, that's what you were asking for. That's how it is in our program.
Yeah, if you want to, what you can do is you can run this. You can take the presentation and open it up, and put it like at the full screen, and then just let it run. So if people are if there's like a lull in activity, you can either show the simulation, run the simulation, and just like let people look at it, or you can run this presentation in full screen and like in the auto advance mode. So like I think you can advance the slides every 30 seconds or every minute, and it'll refresh and it'll walk through the presentation so that if no one's coming to the presentation, you can show the slides looping, and then they'll see like, oh yeah, traveling salesman, I got to get to this one. Just something that they see when they're walking by, and they'll stop and say, oh, that's interesting, or so you got to use your props to your advantage. Your props are the slides here in the simulation. So it's like the poster presentation, but I think this is a bit more useful because you have like you can actually get into things a little bit more deeply. So I hope you do well on this.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think you'll definitely people ask you questions, I think you can handle them pretty well. based on what I've seen here. So I think that's good. I can't really recommend any additional content. I think, yeah, like I said, it's like I don't know how long do you have for this session.
Yeah, that's also an interesting question, because how I've seen it in the program of the conference, they're kind of like, they don't even say poster session; they just say, I mean, look, yeah, there are some. Okay, there are poster presentation and reception for 2 hours on the day one, and then we have some Polish note presentation. Yeah, there are some discussions, but they're probably not that long. Afterwards, there are 2 hours more on the day two.
Okay.
So
yeah.
I have like 4 hours in total to present my work.
Yeah, so I think that should be like, and again, like you can go between like, running a sample presentation or simulation, and when people come up to you, you can either just play the simulation for them, or go to a specific slide or give the whole thing. So you have a lot of options, but I think you want to engage people first of all, and then once you get them, you want to tell them, deliver the thing that might be most stimulating.
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, I hope this goes well. Did you want to show your simulation? Go through it. If say I were coming up to you and you were presenting this, running the simulation for me, well, let's run it and then point things out to me, like the features.
You mean, okay, well, that would be maybe based on concrete actions, like on exact questions that I would receive from the public.
Yeah.
So we can do it, of course, that you ask me some questions and then I try to.
Well, say I was interested in seeing this like thing in action. I said, well, okay, I know what Bragenberg vehicles are, and have kind of seen simulations of them. Well, how do they interact with cues in an environment? I mean, like, how does this? How do we get like different generations of vehicles? I'm not clear on that part.
Yeah, okay. On this question, I would maybe show much more this the genetic algorithm slide.
Okay.
Kind of show the search space. Like how I imagine it is, simulation is just to show that, okay, we have a prototype, and you can like do things there. So I just show the basic controls, just moving vehicles. Maybe that we have an information about the vehicles when we click on them. But maybe there, when some scientific questions do come, I will answer a scientific question with a slide. When some technical question about how we did this, how we did that, in a sense, of course, simulations would come. I will, well, I can even go through code, like if somebody wants. But basically, I imagine that in the simulation, what I kind of talk about there is somewhat near my Python notebook documentation.
Okay.
Because it pretty much explains most of the things.
Yeah, I think that would work. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. I think the Python notebook is helpful. I was looking at that in the pull when you did the pull request. So yeah, and then let's see. Well, why don't you just run the simulation? Can you run the simulation, or is it like?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, let's share your screen. I want to see.
Yeah. Do you see? I know. Okay, so yeah, this just, we have not much windows. I would, of course, say that, well, let's say that's the configuration screen, explaining all of the terms that we have there. Like if somebody asks, that we have a data trace that we can export it to somewhere where we define it to. We can save the settings as default, tick there. Then we kind of started, and there's a plot that's being produced. We see vehicles moving, like also what I've talked about in the presentation, probably. They jump from side to side, like this vehicle here from bottom to up. And we can then switch through epochs with using just our keys. So now we in the epoch 1, starting from 0, and so we have like 2 vehicles that move in various directions apparently, and then we kind of do it. Oh yeah, there's some bug as always, but yeah, so it's showable.
Yeah. And so
yeah, we can also click on the vehicle. We can see like how its brains looks.
Okay. Now, why do they go back and forth? They seem to flip orientation sometimes.
That's a good question. I basically I kind of that's some bug correctly.
Oh.
So I put an area of triangle in the fitness function, and basically the triangle, it shouldn't be it shouldn't be producing this kind of self-crossing behavior. So that's interesting. Yeah, that's some bug that I'll put on my Trello board then and try to fix before the presentation, of course.
Okay. I thought it had something to do with it was like orienting towards different things, like depending on the direction of the stimulus or something. But I don't know.
That also could be. I have to look into it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, those are the kinds of questions you might get too. Like, people won't have seen it ever, so they'll be looking at it. Oh yeah, why does a vehicle look like that, or why does it, and people will be interested. It's very interesting, and it's very good that we have, the different parameter values that you can play with, and you have the output. So that's all very interesting, I think, to like informaticians. Here's the data. Oh, okay, you can export it. Good. They'll be interested in that aspect. So yeah, and I think so we'll get a lot of exposure out of this, and maybe one more thing you want to do on a slide is to add in like where you can find the software.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Like the repo and the downloadable, and then maybe like an open source repository, which would be the one that basically the stuff you submitted to GSoC, but like on a slide.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will do that.
Okay.
I'll just create a new slide called links and just show it to people whenever they're interested. Yeah.
Because they'll probably ask, they'll say, oh, open source, how do I see it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good luck and good job.
Thank you. Yes, I'm sure we'll get some resonance out of it and some new interesting feedback that we can discuss then then use to develop the project further.
Yep. Okay. Well, have a good trip.
Thank you.
All right. Talk to you later.
Talk to you later.
All right.
Goodbye.
Bye.